Hi, I'm Adrian Warnock, and I want to talk to you today about Elijah and his moment of crisis and the very kind and multifaceted way in which God responded. Now, what you're going to see here is actually a biopsychosocial-spiritual approach. God may not have used those terms, but he certainly had that understanding of the man Elijah. So let's just set the scene for a moment. Elijah has prayed and there was no rain. He's then gone through his big confrontation with the prophets of Baal, which doesn't end too well for the prophets of Baal. Um, and then he's prayed for rain. He's at the moment of his zenith, if you like. It's the moment that we all remember him for, his moment of great victory, the moment he's proven the reality of God and seen a great miracle. Modern day charismatics would be very proud of Elijah for seeing the glory of God at work, confronting the whole nation. And so Elijah has prayed. He's asked God to prove himself to Israel. And he prays for rain. But then something happens. He prays for rain, and he runs. And then the woman speaks. The queen, Jezebel. And she says, "May the gods strike me and even kill me, if by the same time tomorrow I've not killed you." Now, that's a pretty strong statement. You have to understand, though, that Elijah had confronted not just one woman, but the whole prophets of Baal and the whole people of God. He'd stand up strong. He'd been the victor. And yet what we see is that he's actually very human. Sometimes when we're humans, our greatest vulnerability comes at our most glorious place. And it says here that Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Who are you, Elijah, that you should be afraid? Why should you be afraid? You've just seen the power of God. And yet, God is very kind and he doesn't confront him directly. He doesn't stop him immediately and say, "What are you doing? Why are you running for your life?" He went into the wilderness. And I guess in a way he got that right. Sometimes it is right to withdraw. Jesus did it. But he sat down next to a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who've already died. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life." Maybe you didn't realize that the Bible has suicidal thoughts in it. Elijah had had enough. He felt overwhelmed. And perhaps you are listening to this today and you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you've had enough. And maybe you've withdrawn from people who perhaps could help you. Very important to reach out to people in that situation. And yet sometimes we choose to isolate ourselves instead. And Elijah is alone and he's desperate and he wants to die. And he realizes that he's no better than his ancestors have already died. And, that's in a way a flash of insight. John Newton says that we have to understand our own hearts and the deception that is inside them if we're going to understand the grace of God. And I suppose you could see this as a moment of self-revelation, that he's not just some great prophet. He's actually a vulnerable man, a sinful man, a man who's no better than his ancestors. And it's interesting, isn't it? This has all happened through the fear of what this lady said, I'm going to kill you. And in that moment, it didn't matter that just hours before he was at the very pinnacle of his career, he was collapsed. And he said, I'm no better. I'm no better than my ancestors. Do you know that's one good thing in a way that comes out of this, because how many of us think we are better than other people? It's the prayer of the Pharisee. I thank God I'm not like that person. And yet sometimes in that moment of revelation, as Newton said, in that moment of revelation, or in that lifetime of revelation, as we understand more and more just how sinful our hearts are, well, God actually comes to us in that moment of understanding. And it's the amazing grace of God. And what's really interesting is that when he lay there and slept under the tree, an angel touched him. An angel touched him and said, get up and eat. Isn't it interesting? The angel didn't touch him and say, you're wrong. Why are you afraid? What are you doing here, Elijah? Why are you overwhelmed? Why are you scared of this threat of this woman? No, he doesn't. He just says, eat. Sometimes when we feel and we experience, rather, we meet somebody who's in suffering, who's in a terrible mental distress, like Elijah was at this moment, we immediately want to tell them something. We immediately want to help them by telling them something, whatever that might be, giving them some advice perhaps, or correcting their thinking, saying to Elijah, no, you're not as bad as you think you are, actually. And God doesn't do that. He sends an angel who could have healed him in the moment, but he doesn't. The angel says, get up and eat. And yes, he provides miraculously food, but do you see how biological this response is? This is a physical need of Elijah's body. So you've been praying, you've been speaking out to the nation, you've been running. You need to eat. And it is interesting how often we forget to look after these bodies of ours, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed, especially when we're feeling that sort of sense of burnout, or that sense of just take me now, I want to die. And God just very tenderly addresses that biological need. He says, get up and eat. And he looks around, and there was a bread that had been baked on hot stones. There was also a jar of water, and he ate and drank. And then he lay down again. And God did let him sleep for a while, but then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat. Eat some more, or the journey ahead of you will be too much for you. And it's interesting, isn't it? Food and sleep can be life transforming when we're in this kind of challenge. I don't know how it is for you, but when you feel that life is just overwhelming, sometimes the last thing you need to do actually is engage with those thoughts, discuss those thoughts, overthink those thoughts. What you need to do is sleep and eat. And of course, sometimes sleep can elude us in those moments. But actually, there are deep needs that we have, biological needs for food and for sleep and for rest. The journey ahead will be too much for you. Do you feel like the journey ahead of you in your life is too much for you? Well, you need nourishment. And of course, Jesus says man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. But man does need bread. Man does need food, and woman does need them too. So he got up and he ate and he drank, and the food gave him strength to travel for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of the Lord. And he came into a cave where he spent the night. So God sends him on a walk. I don't know what he was thinking in that walk. I don't know if his mind was full of um, doubt, full of fear, or if he was just not really thinking at all. But the food, the biological food, the sleep, and now some exercise, if you like, a walk. And sometimes a prayer walk is one of the best things we can ever do. But he comes into a cave, completely alone, hidden, but perhaps at least feeling safe in the cave, that no one could find him, no one could take him to the woman that wanted to kill him. And then the Lord spoke to Elijah and he said, "What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here?" And sometimes God will gently speak to us and ask us the same question. Why are you, child of God, feeling so low? Why are you, child of God, feeling so anxious? Why are you, child of God, feeling like your life is over and that you want to die? There's a kind of gentle rebuke here, but it's a question, and it's a question that invites a response. And I want you to understand, if you're listening to this or watching this even, that God actually wants a conversation with you. He's not going to just shut you down. He's not going to just silence you. He's not going to just say, pull yourself together, man. And so Elijah answers and he says, I've zealously served the Lord God Almighty. And I think that's a fair assessment. And it's okay for us to come to a sort of a positive assessment about ourselves sometimes. Sometimes I think we're too critical of ourselves. But anyway, he says, I've zealously served the Lord of God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Now, what we see here is his thinking is wrong. So we have a psychological problem here, actually. We don't immediately have a psychological solution. We'll come to that. But the psychological problem here is that he believes he's on his own. And anyone who's been through suffering, anyone who's been through significant mental distress, perhaps caused by a physical problem or by a mental health problem or by a social problem in your life, a relationship breakdown, all of these things, knows what it feels like to feel alone. You can be surrounded by people and feel alone, or you can run away into the wilderness like Elijah did and feel alone. I'm the only one left. See, now that's actually a lie, as we're going to find out shortly. But it's a lie that his mind is telling him. And God doesn't immediately challenge it. Sometimes we engage too readily and too quickly with dealing with negative thoughts. And we do need to get there. We do need to get there. But actually, our problem is not just biological. Our problem is not just psychological in terms of the thinking, like we've just seen. And our problem is not just social, of feeling alone, of feeling isolated, of feeling that, Elijah feels like he has no people. He's like, everyone has rebelled against you. I'm the only prophet left. I'm on my own. It's not good for a man to be alone. It's not good for a woman to be alone. But the real solution comes, or at least starts, from the spiritual. So God has been preparing him for this moment. Yes, God has been dealing with some of the very superficial things, practical things, eating, resting, walking. And now he says, come and stand before me. How easy is it for us to forget the need to stand before God, to communicate with God, to be honest with God, to tell him how we're really feeling? Elijah's already said to God, how alone he feels and how desperate he feels and how he wants to just die. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and there was a mighty wind. And then it goes on, it says it was a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. Can you imagine? I mean, I've seen winds blowing things down the street, and I've seen on the TV winds picking things up, and that's what's happening here. It's like a bit of a tornado. And sometimes we imagine that God is this amazing, powerful force, and of course he is. And yet it says here, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. But then, after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. The sound of a gentle whisper, or as some of the old translations put it, a still small voice. The gentle whisper, the still small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And again the voice comes to him and says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah repeats himself, "I'm the only one left. They're trying to kill me." But then God spoke. And we've seen that God has encountered him now spiritually. It says, "But go back." So there's a command here. Go back. God is speaking to him and saying, "Look, I'm not finished with you yet, actually. I want you to go back and I want you to travel. And when you arrive there, well, I'm going to get you to do something to address this feeling that you have of being alone." So actually the solution here that God gives him in this moment of spiritual encounter isn't a purely spiritual solution at all. It's a social one. It says, "I want you to anoint Hazael to be king of Aram and anoint Jehu to be the king of Israel." So God is saying, look, here are these two kings. You have a purpose. Remember, I've called you to be the prophet to speak to kings. But also, even more tenderly than that, because now he's saying, look, you can't be alone. And understand this, that it is God who puts the lonely in families. It is God who draws us together and connects us with people. And so God says to him tenderly, "I want you to anoint Elisha to replace you as my prophet." And he's not saying your ministry's over, but he's saying, look, the biggest job you need to do is realize you're not on your own, actually. You're not the only one left. And actually, your job isn't just to do all the ministry yourself, but as Ephesians 4 puts it, your job is to prepare other people to do the ministry. Training is actually not just about the good of the person being trained, it's also for the good of the person doing the training, because Elijah here feels alone, and now he's being told, you're not on your own. I'm giving you a follower. I'm giving you a disciple. I'm giving you perhaps a friend. And so he says, I will preserve 7,000 people in Israel who've never bowed to Baal or kissed him. See, he's not alone. There are 7,000 people who don't follow Baal. There's these new kings. There's this disciple that he needs to train up and prepare. And so God meets him in a spiritual moment, but God provides a social solution, gives him a purpose, gives him a job to do, and gives him people to do that job with. So I hope you've seen this morning that what we're talking about here is God graciously meeting Elijah's biological needs by giving him sleep, by giving him food, by allowing him to do a little bit of exercise as he walks and to get away from the problem, which is okay to do that sometimes. God gives him, he deals with the psychological problem, because actually what he's doing here in this bit is saying, look, you actually are wrong. You're not alone. You're not the only person that hasn't worshipped Baal. There are 7,000 others, actually, Elijah. So he's correcting the lie. Doesn't do it straight away. He doesn't challenge Elijah's thinking immediately. He waits. But at this moment, he does. He says, look, you're wrong. You're wrong to say you were alone. So God graciously gives him food. God graciously challenges his thoughts and his thinking, his psychology. God also gives him a renewed mission, a renewed task, because that's part of our social world, if you like. We need to have that sense of a purpose. But he gives him people to do that job alongside. He gives him a disciple, a friend. And in all of that, he's encountering him spiritually. And he's telling him, look, I'm with you. Doesn't matter what chaos is going on around you. You can know the still small voice of God saying, I love you. I care for you. And no matter what your situation is today, God will do the same thing to you. God will say, what are your biological needs? And I will meet them. And it's okay for you to address them. What are you thinking? What's your thought patterns? And let me help you take those thoughts captive so that you can be renewed in your thinking. What is your social situation? Do you need a bit of isolation? Do you need to get away a bit? Do you need to take a bit of a break? Reduce your activity? Or have I actually got some new tasks for you that will give you that sense of purpose, and some new friends for you that will give you that sense of not being alone? And yes, he meets you spiritually, because knowing God with you makes all the difference. Jesus never promises that he'll take away all your problems. It was an old song we used to sing that said, and in his presence, our problems disappear. Elijah's problems actually didn't disappear in this moment. But what was different is he wasn't alone anymore, because he knew that God was with him, and he knew that other people were with him. Jesus told us, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And he says, and I'm with you always. I'm with you always, even when it doesn't feel like it, I'm with you. I hope that this has been of some encouragement to you.